fear, shock, bitter, terrible, guilt. These are all very negatively connotated words. But as we go a little bit closer, we can see a bunch of other more positively connotated words. This includes words like fighter, determined, brave, hopeful. What if I told you that all of these words had something in common, that they shared some type of common topic? If we take a look closer, these are actually words that women with breast cancer have used in order to describe their journey. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some correlations that exist between certain lifestyle changes and diets, and how specifically how red meat and that consumption has the ability to impact and actually increase somebody's breast cancer risk. So even though there are some negative aspects to breast cancer, there are ways that we can actually work on today in order to prevent this from becoming an actual problem. So I'm going to start off with some important statistics. So the number 276,480. As you can see, all of these actual numbers have so many variations, some very big, some very small. So starting off with the 276,840, that refers to the number of women that were expected to be diagnosed with breast cancer starting in the year 2020. The number 2.6% represents that 1 out of every 38 women that are diagnosed with breast cancer would end up dying from breast cancer. The number 87.8 billion refers to the amount of money that is being spent on cancer-related health care. This includes outpatient visits, physician visits, prescriptions, and all the numbers of healthcare that is being put into place in order to combat cancer risk and cancer itself. And the 1.3%, which you might not see, but it is right here, that represents a more hopeful number. It represents that the death rate has actually decreased by 1.3% annually from 2013 to 2017. So as you can see, even though we have a lot of numbers, again, representing this more negative side of breast cancer, as we look a little bit closer, there is a positive side, and I want to give you more ways so that you can figure out what exactly can I do to minimize my breast cancer risk. Now, I know a lot of you in the audience today, a lot of women here under the age of 60. I invited all of you because I wanted to show you that, no matter what age you are, you can do something to prevent your breast cancer risk. So I will go into that first by starting with risk factors. So it might not be a little bit clear, but basically these are a number of risk factors that can impact and greatly negatively impact actually somebody's breast cancer risk. So we have over here alcohol consumption, lymphedema, osteopenia, osteoporosis, unnecessary drug use, and lack of physical activity. So with these in mind, how can I lower my breast cancer risk? What can you do specifically to lower your breast cancer risk? Well, we can literally look at these risk factors and figure out what exactly we can do. So we can actually limit our alcohol consumption. That allows for a lower risk. We can increase our physical activity, avoiding that type of sedentary lifestyle to get our heart going. We can also limit unnecessary drug use, really just limiting what we take, our medications, to things that are absolutely essential. And when it comes to lymphedema, osteoporosis, and osteopenia, we can take specific medications that are prescribed by physicians. So all of these serve as very specific dietary, well, not really dietary, but more lifestyle interventions that I'm addressing here. And then we're going to move on to more of the dietary perspective now. So red meat and heart disease. So what studies have found is that consumption of red meat has the capacity to increase somebody's risk of developing heart disease. So what has actually been found instead is that if you switch red meat for more of like plant-based protein sources, nuts, legumes, that actually contributes to less of a chance of developing heart disease. Now, what does this have to do with breast cancer? Well, heart disease is a major contributor, as found in many studies. It has been a major contributor to breast cancer. which shows that in this sense, in this knowledge, with this knowledge in mind, by decreasing your red meat intake and increasing intake of other, a variety of foods actually, like fruits, vegetables, legumes, that actually can contribute to a lower heart disease risk and contribute to lower breast cancer risk. So those are just some things regarding risk factors and what we can do there from a more dietary approach. And specifically, as you can tell, I'm really addressing it more from limiting red meat consumption. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to address here is studies that have been done in postmenopausal women, analyzing how limiting red meat intake has the ability to lower breast cancer risk in postmenopausal women. So the first study I'm going to analyze was by Inoue Choi et al. 2015, and really what they mainly analyzed was that a total higher red meat intake was actually associated with a higher regional and distant cancer risk. At the same time, higher processed red meat intake in particular actually resulted in a 27% higher risk of localized breast cancer. Now, a higher consumption of red meat and processed meat overall was found to increase one's postmenopausal breast cancer risk. But something interesting that they also analyzed in the study was more of the impact of adding nitrites and heme iron to your diets. Why would they analyze this? This is because red meat actually contains both of these specific elements, and so in analyzing that in particular, they were able to pinpoint exactly what about red meat is able to kickstart the development of breast cancer. And so they actually found that when they specifically limited their intake to only heme iron or only nitrite, that actually resulted, both of those, when they were taken separately, they actually resulted in a higher breast cancer risk. So clearly, those specific components of red meat were found to have a specifically strong impact. Now, in a different study that was conducted by Edgeberg et al. 2008, the aim was specifically to investigate a very specific idea about polymorphisms in N-acetyltransferase 1 and 2, and to see how that contributed to the association between meat consumption and breast cancer risk. And you might be wondering, what is a polymorphism? Well, it's basically a fancy term to describe some type of discontinuous genetic variation. So what they found was that when they specifically analyzed this polymorphism in intermediate or fast N-acetyltransferase 2 acetylators, that contributed to a positive association between total meat intake and red meat intake, and that relationship of those two things to breast cancer risk. So even though it was limited specifically to this type of N-acetyltransferase, it still shows that there is a type of correlation between increasing red meat intake and somebody's breast cancer risk. Now I'm going to analyze it more from a premenopausal perspective. How does limiting red meat intake impact premenopausal women? So the first study I'm going to analyze is Cho et al. 2006, and this one really, they wanted to hypothesize, and actually no, they wanted to further explain, the hypothesis that red meat intake can actually increase breast cancer risk. But they stated specifically that a lot of these prospective cohort studies have really been inconsistent because there was a lot of confounding based on some type of unsure menopausal status of the participants being involved. So they wanted to conduct this type of meta-analysis of 10 different studies regarding this association between limiting red meat intake and breast cancer risk. And they were able to find that there was a higher chance of premenopausal breast cancer when there was a higher red meat intake. These words ER and PR specifically refer to estrogen and progesterone. So progesterone and estrogen receptor mediated breast cancer is specifically what they're trying to analyze here. But we can see once again that when we are addressing it from this perspective, limiting red meat intake has the capacity to really bring about a lower breast cancer risk. Now, here we have a final study that was conducted by Farvid et al. In 2014. And this one really analyzed more about adolescent diets and how that also impacts breast cancer risk. The first thing that they found was when it was adolescent intake of poultry, this actually contributed to lower breast cancer risk. And that when you replace your one serving per day of red meat with other foods, which includes more of poultry, fish, legumes, and nuts, you actually limit your overall breast cancer risk by approximately 15%. And you lower your premenopausal breast cancer risk by an even greater amount at 23%. So here we can see the highly beneficial consequences that can result from lowering red meat intake and replacing that with a different type of diet. And here we see overall again that higher red meat consumption during adolescence is associated with higher premenopausal breast cancer risk, and that when you substitute with other dietary protein sources, this can actually have the capacity and the potential to decrease premenopausal breast cancer risk. So when I just want to talk about conclusions overall so far today, something I really want you to take from this is that there's been a lot of evidence that has been showing that limiting red meat intake can contribute to lower breast cancer risk in women. And so, as mentioned before, really, if you're looking for what can I do really to limit this in terms of dietary intervention, you really can just replace your diet with, again, as I said before, a wider variety of vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, and like lower fat dairy products. And really the main thing here also is if you replace it with plant-based protein sources, that is also shown to have more of a positive impact. So thank you. That is all I have for you today. After this TED Talk, I will be sending out a survey to everyone here today. And for people that are listening to this at home over maybe in the future when this is published, you can still take this quiz to analyze really what exactly you learned from today's presentation. And I just hope that you were able to learn a lot about specifically the dietary interventions that you can take here in order to lead a healthier life and to prevent breast cancer overall. So thank you so much. Thank you.